Lane Kiffin is winless on the field against Nick Saban, but he is undefeated in trolling. And we're going to sort through all the mess. Grace Remington here with David Johnson and John Talty. Guys, Bama opening as a 7-point favorite in T-Town. It's won 7 straight games in this series, back to that infamous 2015 game. But the Tide looking vulnerable this season. So let's break down this game a little bit further. A lot of familiarity between these coaching staffs. Maybe a little bit too much familiarity. Lane Kiffin claiming earlier this week that Saban has demoted Kevin Steele, and he knows this via the tape. So, Dave, what is the truth here?
Yeah, well, the story that's being forgotten this week is that Ole Miss now has Pete Golding as its defensive coordinator. So, Lane may have seen some tendencies to suggest that, but we're talking about Lane Kiffin here. So why not flip the controversy, if you will, back on the Alabama side of things? And I think that's what he's done. Certainly a big story when he comes out and goes, look, Kevin Steele's not calling this defense. How does Lane Kiffin know that? Well, obviously he says from tendencies, but, we'll see what happens. But nobody seems to be talking about Pete Golding coming back home to Tuscaloosa.
I think David makes a great point there. I think when Pete Golding left Alabama for Ole Miss, it felt like when this game came around that Pete Golding would be one of the biggest storylines of the week. And it really hasn't been talked about at all. It really has not been a major discussion point. I think that Lane is the GOAT when it comes to trolling. I think he's been doing it all week. I think the reference to Castles Crumbling, the Taylor Swift song, I think was very pointed. He knows what he's doing this week, and I think that's what he's trying to do. I have enjoyed the back and forth. You've had Kiffin say it, Saban pushed back on it, Kiffin doubled down, and then Saban asked about it again on Wednesday and essentially say, I'm not touching it, like Kevin Steele's our guy. So I think it's just some gamesmanship happening right now between two people who know each other very well, and Lane, a person who likes to try to get under Nick Saban's skin a little bit.
I loved the Taylor Swift references on Lane Kiffin's timeline, John, so I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know if she has a song to describe the quarterback carousel going on in Tuscaloosa, though. We've seen Bama kind of go through this before. However, this one is actually concerning this time. Milroe, the most efficient starter so far. Saban says he gets to start this time, but what do you think the situation is, John?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it might be a love story between Alabama and Jalen Milroe now as he gets back into the mix. It's been interesting. I think Alabama, has been so spoiled with just the incredible run of quarterbacks that they've had, from Jalen Hurts to Mac Jones and then Bryce Young. So this year there's a lot more uncertainty. We saw the quarterback change that they made against South Florida. It did not seem to work. I thought Ty Simpson did some okay things, but I think they felt like Jalen Milroe was the guy they needed to go back to. So here we have a really interesting opportunity against Ole Miss to see whether Tommy Reese, their new offensive coordinator, can better utilize Jalen's skill set, maybe better utilize what he brings to the table from a play calling standpoint after didn't feel like they fully were able to maximize his skills against Texas.
Ole Miss is preparing for Jalen Milroe, of course, and a players only meeting and things like that happen over in Tuscaloosa. Maybe Nick Saban's dealing out a little troll himself on Lane Kiffin. I think Alabama's going to be fully prepared on Saturday, and I think you're probably going to see their best effort yet. It's an SEC game. It's absolutely huge. The two schools are only 2 hours apart. The coaching staff familiarity. The quarterback controversy, I don't think there's a quarterback controversy. Jalen Milroe's going to play, and that's what Ole Miss is preparing for.
Now, when looking at this Alabama team, it's kind of hard to find some context for what's happening with the dynasty right here. You look at things like, Alabama's ranked outside the top 10 for the first time since 2015 when they won the national championship. Per total QBR, Saturday was Bama's worst quarterback game since 2009 when they won the national championship. So, John, what is actually at stake for Alabama right now in this game?
I think there's a lot at stake. For Alabama, if they were to lose this game, it would be the first time that Alabama has 2 losses in September since Nick Saban's first year in 2007. I think the dynasty is dead talk has already been bubbling up. We've seen people talk about it after the loss to Texas, and I think that would really become even more full-throated, even more of a narrative around this team if they're not able to win against Ole Miss. So there's plenty of kind of historical precedent to not panic, like you mentioned there, Grace. That 2015 team is the one that I've compared this one to multiple times. They lose to Ole Miss early on in the season. Jake Coker kind of comes on as the quarterback, and they're able to figure it out, and they decide to really ride Derrick Henry down the stretch as he won the Heisman. Now, there's not a Derrick Henry on this team, but you feel like maybe if everything kind of comes to works out as well as it could, that the struggle against South Florida, the loss to Texas, will get Alabama's best performance against Ole Miss here, knowing the stakes should they lose.
Now, David, considering the quarterback situation we talked about, Alabama's output against USF, Lane Kiffin seems to sense some blood in the water here. How vulnerable do you actually think Bama is here?
I don't think Bama is vulnerable at all, to be quite honest with you. And Ole Miss is a team that really isn't running on all cylinders. You've got Trey Harris, who's going to miss this game. He was a great wide receiver. Tight end Caden Prieskorn, very questionable for this game. It's Alabama. It's Alabama football. It is the gold standard for the country. And because they had a bad night against Texas and a subpar showing against South Florida, everybody wants to write them off. I agree the early indicators are not good on the Crimson Tide, but time and time again, they have risen up and handled Ole Miss well in Tuscaloosa. Ole Miss is going to have a battle on its hands, and I think they're going to get the best effort thus far this season from the Crimson Tide.
All right, well, speaking of best effort, we need a player to watch or an X factor in this game. So, David, who are you looking at?
Yeah, no doubt about it. Quinshon Judkins, the running back from Pike Road, Alabama. Alabama passed on him. Auburn passed on him. He ended up at Ole Miss, was a freshman sensation last year. And honestly, he hasn't gotten going yet. He's averaging around 2 yards per carry. Some folks blame the offensive line. Some folks blame Quinshon. Some folks have even questioned some of the play calling. He's got to get going. You've got to see the 2022 Quinshon Judkins on the field in all of his glory Saturday, I think, for Ole Miss to have a chance to win.
If Ole Miss is going to get Alabama's best the way that David expects, I think it has to start up front. It's got to start with the offensive line. This is a unit that has struggled so far this season. There was a lot of talk in the offseason about wanting to physically impose themselves, wanted to kind of get back to some of that bully ball that we saw earlier on in Nick Saban's tenure, and we haven't seen it. This is a unit that struggled against Texas and struggled against South Florida, and so this is a group that has plenty of talent. There's multiple 5-stars, J.C. Latham, Caden Proctor. I mean, there's plenty of big names on that group, but it just hasn't fully clicked yet. Tyler Booker missed South Florida back problem. He's still been banged up and out of practice this week. So there's a lot of questions with this group that we thought was going to be a strength. And so they're facing, I think, an Ole Miss defensive group that can get after the quarterback. And if they can't do a better job of protecting Jalen Milroe, then I think it's going to be a challenge for Alabama.
Yeah, shocking stat. You would not expect to see this attached to the Tide. They're allowing a 14% sack rate, worst in the Power 5. But two of the best in the biz right here. David, John, thanks for joining us. And for more on this game, be sure to check out Bama 24/7 and InsideTheRebels.com for your Crimson Tide and Rebel football and recruiting news all season long.